Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I, Bharat Kumar Jaswal, Regional Director, ASSOCHAM, welcome you all on this eve of Knowledge Management Virtual Meet, second edition, Skill 2.0, a future skill perspective, next wave of policy reform. Country's skill development ecosystem is the backbone of tomorrow's workforce. Not only provide for vocational training, but also ensures that the same is translated into meaningful employment through demand supply mapping of skill set across sectors. The current disruption has affected millions of trainees undergoing training in the long term and short term skill ecosystem. COVID 19 has led to more than 30,000 ITIs, NSTIs, training center temporarily suspended operations and impacting more than 50 lakh candidates in India. It is imperative to add workforce related challenges across the sectors. This point of view captures three solutions that addresses the most critical role COVID-19 period. This solution focuses on reprioritizing skill sector, technology interventions for continuous learning, and the key impact of financial management. Today in our panel discussion, we have a mix of experts of all three. With us, we have Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha, co-chairperson, ASSOCHAM Jharkhand State Development Council and founder, director, CMC Skills Private Limited. Mr. Ashok Mehta, Chief Business Officer, VITI Labs Limited. Mr. Neeraj Sinha, Head Retail and Consumer Banking, SBM Banks India Limited. Dr. Sumit Susilan, Chairman, International Institute of Aviation Private Limited. Mr. Sujay Gopal Rao, Chief Manager, Indian Overseas Bank. With a deep sense of gratitude on behalf of ASSOCHAM, I would like to welcome all the panelists and session chairperson, Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha. I have every hope that today's discussion will be fruitful and the skill sector will be benefited. With this positive note, before starting the panel discussion, I would like to request Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha, co-chairperson, ASSOCHAM Jharkhand State Council, and founder CMC Skill Limited for her theme address. Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha embodies the very spirit of emerging India, dynamic and resilient, with a can-to-do attitude. She has built around her an organization that lives, breathes, and dreams her vision to add quality to the life of Indians by empowering them with skills. She is a former Indian Revenue Services officer, and that certainly reflects in her never say die attitude. Ms. Swaminathan Sinha is also an independent director on the board of Sriram City Union Finance Limited, Shreyas Shipping and Corp Logistics Limited, Air Asia India Limited, GR Infra Projects Limited, Tata Boeing Aerospace Limited, Midcon Consultancy and Engineering Services, and Flamingo Travels Retail Limited. Once again, I request Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha for her theme address.
Thank you, Bharat. Thank you for your. Good morning to all, and welcome to this Knowledge Management Virtual Meet Skill 2.0, a future skill perspective. We had a webinar some time ago when the lockdown began and when we got hit by this pandemic, and we discussed certain aspects of immediate challenges to skill development in the country at that time. Today we are 3 months into the lockdown, with the lockdown extended for another month, which has had its own impact on the country, on the world, on every industry, every sector, every method of working, and so also the skill development sector. I would also like to add here that the pandemic actually has forced us to look at certain issues which were already plaguing us for at least a year or so before this. I specifically refer to the slowdown in the economy, which has been looking at us for the last 18 to 24 months, the changing regulatory environment in the country, the challenges to banking in the country, the challenges to various industry which were huge absorbers of labor, who have been looking at a slowdown like the automotive sector. And the pandemic has kind of brought to our doors the need to immediately resolve and to immediately relook at the way at which we do business. As far as the skill development sector is concerned, there are some truisms which all of us are very aware of. The advantages that India has vis-a-vis the rest of the world is that we are a young population. We are possibly one of the countries with the youngest population, and therefore have the opportunity and the advantage as well as a business opportunity to be global exporters of skilled manpower for the rest of the world. However, this would require us to look at skilling and education as from a very different perspective than what we've been used to in the last 70 years. Our population is young, our population is poor, our population is also very aspiring thanks to the huge internet revolution that has happened over the last 10 years, where information is available in every nook and corner of the country, and therefore the aspirations of the young poor in rural and urban India has undergone a dramatic change in the last 5 to 7 years. And therefore the onus on industry and government and entrepreneurs in this sector is that much larger to make sure that the aspirations of the young in this country are met through relevant skill development and relevant education, which provides them opportunities to get good jobs, remunerative jobs, as well as entrepreneurship opportunities in India as well as the rest of the world. What I have stated just now is what all of us know or all of us are aware of, and this is one part of the advantage of having this young population. But hand in hand comes a very huge downside, and that downside is that while we have a huge young population, please, we must all remind ourselves that youth is blessed with a lot of energy. Youth is blessed with a lot of ability to learn, ability to quickly absorb and learn new things, which older people are not. However, this blessing can turn to a curse if we don't know how to channel this rightly. If their energies and their mental abilities and their aspirations are not properly channeled and applied to time-consuming, mind-consuming, physically consuming jobs and opportunities which are remunerative as well, we will actually be facing a very huge social disorder in this country. If the huge number of youth we have are not gainfully employed, we would be facing very huge social problems like cheating, robbing, murders, etc., which would stem from the basic fact that we have this huge army of young people who need to be channelized correctly. Now, with this in mind, we have where the government has, it's not new, but the NDA government has given it a very special focus in forming the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship by also redefining a lot of flagship programs that were operating in this sector earlier, but which have now been redefined by this current government, given more focus. We have the apex body of the NSDC, which funds such organizations, which also has sector skills councils operating under it, which go into every sector of the country, which define job roles, which define curriculum, which do assessment and certification. Then you have training service providers like CMC Skills operating all over the country, who are either NSDC partners or not NSDC partners, who work on various government-funded projects, as well as CSR-funded projects and privately funded projects, in order to transform this large army of youth into employable resources for India's industry. While this has all been going on in a particular fashion, maybe requiring a lot of new look and a lot of innovative changes even before the pandemic has forced upon us the need to completely innovate the way this whole business of skill development is conducted in this country. With this in view, one of the obvious solutions that comes to the mind of everybody is, why don't we have more and more online training programs? Why don't we go digital? Why don't we train them in shorter term skill programs, which are largely digital, with augmented reality, virtual reality playing a big role in this whole thing, and therefore train them in a different way. Let the mode of importing training be different. Let the sectors we train them for be different, because it's possible that traditional sectors which absorb the most labor, like construction, like automobiles, maybe these sectors will not be able to, like hospitality, travel and tourism, maybe these sectors going forward will not be able to absorb the same number of people as there used to be before. So the entire training scenario in the country needs to undergo a change vis-a-vis the industries they would provide trained labor for, vis-a-vis the method of training these people, as well as methods of successful certification and assessment for these. But in all this, a very, very major change is required from the government. Training service providers in this country are largely working on government funded projects, which have very typical parameters to it, which have typical scopes of work, typical methods of assessing when payments are due and when they will make payments to the training service providers. Those typical methods or those typical contours of government contracts presume a physical training in physical labs, subject to students actually attending those classes, taking training in a face-to-face model, in a brick and mortar model, and then being placed. If all this is to undergo a change, is government ready to change the contours of the contract? Is government ready to change the methods of payment to the training service providers for these changes in contract? Is government ready to step up the amount of money they will provide to training service providers, because their whole method of imparting training, their whole industry focus, everything will have to undergo a sea change. So is government willing to pay for that? Another question would be, if government is not willing to pay fully for it, is industry willing to pay for that? The third question would be, if industry as well as government are not able to take the entire load, are the youth willing to pay a fee to get trained in a more meaningful fashion, to be employed in a more gainful fashion than before? These are the roughly the issues that we'd like to discuss in this webinar. And towards this, we have some very illustrious speakers with us this morning. Bharat, would you like me to introduce the speakers? Bharat?
Yes, ma'am, you have the profile, or should you want me to?
I have the profile. So I will introduce one speaker after the other. I will introduce the first speaker, give a brief background of the person, and request him to speak on a particular aspect of the entire scenario that I have just laid down. So I think we will start with Mr. Ashok Mehta. Is that right? Yeah. So we start with Mr. Ashok Mehta. And I would request him to speak on the technology perspective of the whole challenge that we have before us. Mr. Ashok Mehta is the Chief Business Officer at Viative Labs Limited. Which is a leading global immersive technology company with its operations in 10 countries. He's a corporate leader with over 26 years of experience in spearheading business operations in education technology and the skilling domain. He's also the ex-president of Educom, where he spearheaded business in ICT and skills. I would request Mr. Ashok Mehta, with his kind of experience. I'm very happy to note that you were with Educom, because Educom was one of the forerunners in the country in delivering technology-based education solutions. They worked very extensively with government schools. They did a lot of work in skill development as it was then in the country. And so I'm sure you have had a lot of experience of technology driven solutions of delivering education in this country. I would request you to please illuminate this gathering of people on this webinar with your thoughts on the technology perspective of how you see skills evolving post pandemic. Thank you.
Sir, you are not audible, sir.
Ashok sir, you are not audible, sir.
Sir,
No, sir. Sir, please go to the audio setting and select computer audio. Now, sir, please
Yeah.
speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now audible, audible,
yes, sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, fantastic.
You're audible now.
Thank
You're
you
audible
so
now.
much. Thank you so much, ma'am, Ms. Maya Swaminathan Sinha, for such an enlightening, speech that you have given, and I think that sets the context of the day. Uh, Very important and crucial for me that I will confine myself my talk with the technology integration. But then before I start saying that, I would like to kind of give a quick snapshot of why technology in today's context. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes, it
Okay,
is.
so as we progress, I will try to kind of capture some important points uh, of my presentation. We all have been in some way and in certain stages witness to the evolution of the industrialization that has taken place in the 4 generations. The focus of the program as it is for technology integration, therefore I will just come to the 4th industrial revolution, which is very, very relevant to the context today. Internet of things, robotics, big data, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence are going to be integral part of the industry 4.0, which is where our industries globally are all headed to. And therefore, there is a need for us to talk about it, try and see that whether the workforce that we are building or creating today is ready for tomorrow. What is changing for industry is very important for us to kind of take a look at. Traditional manufacturing in the process side of it was rigid and manual, which is very, very kind of conventional thing that we are all used to when we have worked in our own times. Today, Industry 4.0 is talking about agile and automated process, which means that there is a lot of technology stuff integrated into it, and to make it agile and to make it automated. This also kind of indicates that there could be some changes in the job skills required, because some jobs will go out of the scene and some new jobs will come as an opportunity for the workforce. On the product side of it, we did have the standardized product, but then as we kind of head towards industry 4.0, we talk about more personalized experiences to the customers on the solutions or the services or the products that the buyer and the customer in the marketplace will have. Scale of factories, large factories used to be kind of, more of centralized locations. Today, the trend is that smaller factories would happen in much more number of locations in a very decentralized fashion. Supply chain, it used to be kind of, stock-based planning, but today it is very dynamic and predictive. Success metrics also will have to kind of, see that it is changing completely, that we had initially the low cost and high efficiency expectation, whereas today we have the high return as an expectation on the capital employed, which means that yes, we have a much more value for money than we used to have before. And client relationship, of course, low and indirect, which has been the kind of case in the traditional manufacturing. Industry 4.0 is talking about the high and direct engagement. Changes with adoption of industry that has kind of, started happening. Automated production assembly lines to be equipped with robots, predictive maintenance, continuous machine monitoring, connected machines, 3D printing. These are some of the things which are all going to get used to listening, talking, and living in the new industrial scenario. Well, therefore, the job scenarios will also change in the sense that the future of jobs or the changing skill sets required would focus more towards that the technology side. There would be a huge demand created across user and entity. It would be big data analysis, and there are a list of job roles kind of, identified, or it is being seen. Internet of Things, again, software developers, applications, computer systems, engineers, architects, marketing managers, sales representative, wholesale manufacturing, etc., etc. I'm not really going to kind of, list out all the job roles which are there, because in the given time frame, I'm trying to just put forth one fact that let us all understand and start accepting and then get ready for the change. The fact that a lot of jobs which were there conventionally very important and which held significance till today or till yesterday is slowly going to either go out of the scene, or we need to upgrade our skill sets in order to stay in those jobs, because certain things which would be handled only by machines or by the technologies. If I am a cashier, I need to change my job skills for stay in the job for tomorrow, because I may not be used to doing the same way of counting cash as I used to before, or writing books as I used to do before, because those things are being taken care of by technology, which assures more efficiency in the process, yet a greater outcome. But then I have my relevance in the job. All it wants is, or all it requires is that I must change myself, upgrade my skills, or get adapted to the new changed environment, which demands some exposure to the technology. This is a US Bureau of Labor Statistics and World Economic Forum that kind of highlighted in their report that there are certain set of jobs which are going to go, and certain jobs are emerging in place, like big data architects, automation technicians, renewable energy engineers, automation engineers, organizational development specialists, new technology specialists, IT administrator, digital transformation specialist, IT project manager, and data analyst. These are the people, these are the jobs which are going to emerge with the advent of the new technologies. The declining jobs are going to be the team assemblers, secretaries, administrative assistant, except legal, medical, and executive, inspectors, testers, sorters, samplers, weighers, drilling, boring machine, electrical and electronic equipment assemblers, milling and planning machine settlers, data entry keyers, paper goods machine setters, bookkeeping, accounting, auditing clerks, and cashiers. I had kind of short interaction with one of the bankers in the BFI sector, and he said that look, the way the technologies are coming for the kind of greater productivity, I need to kind of reskill my own people in order to stay abreast with those technologies. Otherwise, my people are absolutely redundant in their jobs. Therefore, ma'am has also just, while talking about the today's challenge, which is like none of us had predicted ever that we would be all grappling with the COVID crisis that we are kind of, facing last more than 3 months. And I think we do not know, because as the experts and the kind of people in those leadership positions have come to believe that this is going to stay for some time. Question here is, therefore, how do we continue educating and skilling people? Because that has to stay, and that is contextual, and which requires some sort of intervention, some sort of change in the way we used to train people, and now that we have to. Globally, it has been again acknowledged and seen, and I'm sure, because all of us are kind of seeing things around, that when we want to maintain social distancing, and yet to have services and goods delivered from one place to another, or the business carried out from one place between two parties or two organizations or two people, there is a role of technology, and all of us are today already, knowingly or unknowingly, we have started using it in order to carry out our daily transactions. Talking about skilling under various schemes of the government, it is very critical, therefore, to infuse or integrate AR/VR technologies in our training profile. In the sense, when I'm saying training profile, there is a reason for it, and there are some pointers which I will touch upon in order to bring to the light that how AR/VR is so relevant in current times and as we go forward. Not that it was not acknowledged or recognized before, but then people had a means and ways of carrying forward their ongoing training schemes and programs, and therefore we were okay with that. Not that NSDC was, or the government bodies were not aware. They have, in fact, I personally have had a couple of rounds of meeting. I have met with Mr. Manish Kumar, who heads the NSDC, and he told me that the current schemes do not envisage to have technologies, or if we want to, we have left to the training providers to carry forward and integrate those technology aspect of it in order to make training more productive and effective. But the fact of the matter is, I would like to use this opportunity to bring to the foray that it is not just about how and who is going to do it. It's not about having a choice. Today, we are left with no choice but to use technology in order to augment our human capacities, even during these turbulent times when we have to maintain social distancing, when we have to have training going on, when we have to still abide by the various guidelines and which are there for controlling the pandemic to further spread, or the breakout to kind of get contained. How do we do that? So AR/VR comes definitely handy here to help us all out. How it happens? When we want to kind of envisage a training time period or the duration for a training, AR/VR is going to help in a big way to reduce the training cycle, which implies that you have more productivity with a lesser investment of your time, which directly implies that you have the cost reduction as well. Reduce risk of accidents. Trainings like, we just imagine all the industrial trainings that we have, some way or other we have to all deal with. Our workforce has to deal with large equipments, large machineries, and there are in certain areas of this operational activities lot of accidents taking place. It is not that it will happen today, it has been happening since time immemorial, but then we all started living with it, thinking that apply the best precautionary measures and then deal with it. Point here is that with emergence of technologies from time to time, it brings to us a lot of opportunities, a lot of insight on how we can completely avoid getting into those accidents which are at times fatal. I would like to quote here that recently, not recently, I mean, I would say that few years back, in one of the PSUs, power sector, NTPC, if I recall correctly, there was one big fatal accident because there were some technicians who were there to kind of, connect high tension wire at some, the panel area where they went, and there was one mistake committed by the technician that you have set procedures to carry out in order to complete that task. One single task out of the list was missed out or sort of omitted in the process, and that led to the fatal accident. There was a loss of life. I was talking to some people in the Indian oil sector, in fact, Indian oil, company with a very senior executive director level, and he was saying that every year we have some accidents taking place. When there was a guy whose last 17 years has been doing the painting of the the tanker which carries the highly inflammable fuel. He went inside and he choked and he died. Why did this happen even after a person who has been doing this task for 15 or 17 years? It clearly highlights that it is quite human that there are chances that we tend to commit mistakes. Why not we bring a technology out here which does not allow me to carry out my next task till I have finished the first one? And there is a role for AR/VR in such kind of areas. So likewise, we have lesser training costs. As I said, eventually it will kind of bring down the cost of deployment of the capital in terms of getting the same sort of outcome. So the role of technology definitely has its place here. Students or the trainees who have undergone the training have a better knowledge and retention. The fact is, why? Because everything he has learned by doing it. AR/VR is all about you learn things by doing it. You recreate a virtual environment for the same. Let's say, for an example, I want to operate on a factory or on a plant. The whole equipment can come live on my table right inside my training room. Practically, it is impossible to bring such large cranes inside the classroom and then take children or take students to experiencing or making them experience or learn each and every parts of it. It is very difficult. It remains theoretical till the person has gone actually on the job and then start experiencing it. Again, AR/VR comes handy for it. What can be the better example than the aviation industry? We have one of the eminent speakers here on the panel also from that industry. I would say that why is that every a person who has to fly an aeroplane has to mandatorily undergo a simulation exercise, simulation experience of X number of hours. Why is it mandatory? And that is one reason perhaps that aviation industry has the minimal accidents compared to all other vehicular accidents that take place in the world. So again, AR/VR has a role to play. Due to limited time, I'm just skipping these areas and trying to remain confined to. Of course, I mean, I'm sure we all understand that there has to be a strategic plan for upgrading our skills as we head towards 4.0. Definitely, there has to be reskilling of the manpower already existing on those workplace, and that I'm sure organizations are taking initiatives. I'm in touch with a couple of organizations which I know, and I know that they are pretty much aware and they are already taking initiatives in those directions in order to train and retrain their people or uptrain them for it. Shaping the future, because those trainees who are coming to work in those industries, they need to be prepared, keeping that industry 4.0 into consideration, which implies that all the training programs that we have today, somewhere or other, it requires a little revisit, maybe infusion of some components into the training program in order to ensure that the students who undergo this kind of technical training, especially heavy industrial manufacturing equipment kind of understanding or the walkthrough or the whole knowledge base that one has to create, I think AR/VR is going to play a very important role out there. Optimizing talent ecosystem conditions, of course, we need to kind of rethink on the organizational structures that we may have, transform culture to attract and retain next generation talent, develop a culture of lifelong learning. I'm sure many of the organizations have been trying in their own way and doing it, but then in the entire ecosystem, I wish there should be some sort of a consensus across. Coming to Viative's use cases for frontline workforce, because I come from Viative, and therefore what I'm showing and sharing here are some of the use cases already happening, and it has taken place in different parts of the country. Viative is working in 25 countries with their products and services, reaching out to various people in different industries, as well as it is catering to the education segment, right from K-12 to higher classes as well. It specializes in providing VR, AR kind of solutions to augment human capacity, to enhance learning experiences. Because in AR, VR, anything that we are talking about, it is all experiential. One has to learn by doing it. It is like practical experience you are gaining. Look at learning and development side of it. As I say, Viative has worked on several L&D immersive apps in various sectors, including power, oil and gas, and automotive sector. One of the recent work includes familiarization of oil drilling process for technicians using HTC Vive. Now, these are some of the, because we do not have time and I do not want to sound like I have come here to showcase Viative products. So I would restrict my talk to only to the pointers that in the learning and development areas of every organization across sectors, I think already L&D content is undergoing a transformation. As far as I'm aware, many companies, large companies, industrial organizations, PSUs have already started transforming their educational 2D data or the typical e-learning data into online AR, VR kind of experiences that they want to infuse into the entire learning process. Consumer experience, because a customer can get a better experience using AR, VR. For an example, today, an automotive sector people want to sell their products to the customers. Customers sitting at home can actually virtually drive the car, go through the entire engine, go through the entire all the parts and features of the product and understand it. So these things are there. There could be a collaborative work carried out using AR, VR. Imagine we have on the border some expertise required where the expert is sitting here in Delhi, and there is an some disaster management activities to be carried out, or somewhere in the remote areas of the country, anywhere. It could be mining, it could be related with civil work, it could be anything, construction work. Now somebody who is an expert of that job is sitting in Delhi right now. It can be easily collaborated because the person at site, all he has to do is put his mobile phone, because these are all synced through the applications. Put his mobile phone, it captures this entire object and it augments to the expert here. Expert gives the advice to the person sitting at the remote area of the country, and he takes the instruction and he does it, because literally virtually the same product or the same challenge or the same difficulty is visible to the expert in his room, as well as it is visible to the person physically at the site where he or she is sitting. And this can be collaborated through their own experiences and expertise, and they can find a way out. This is very much carried out in manufacturing sector and many other critical areas of operation where you do not expect the person in the blue collars level would require to have all those experiences or all those expertise, may not be required, but you still want to carry a blue collar guy carry out that particular work. It is possible because expert sitting somewhere else is able to provide all the inputs. So likewise, I'll just move on to the next point. So just like we have sometimes I personally was involved in conducting skill training for under PMKVY, DDU, GKY for certain states, and we carried out some training like bed assistant kind of in job profile. We carried out a training on electrician profile. We carried out a training on construction mason job. When we provide the training, we skill them, no doubt. But the person or the student who is undergoing the training fail to visualize where will be his place of actual work. And sometimes it has been seen, not only me, I know that this has been also in the news by the NSDC and the government from time to time, that so much of placement happens, and this has been one of the pain points of the vocational training providers, that look, I place my people, but after 3 months, 6 months, he is not staying there because he is not enjoying his work. He gets nostalgic, he wants to come back to his hometown. It is not just that he is emotionally weak. I think there are a lot many other factors which influence his decision to quit that place. One of such things is that when he took training, he failed to visualize what actually the place of work is going to be for him. What we call OJT. OJT is carried out at a different place, but the actual placement happens at some other place sometimes. Now, this can be very well understood and visualized and lived and experienced by the students who are undergoing the training, because those experiences, like imagine a particular plant site or the factory or the mill, entire 360-degree view of the entire campus can be brought alive inside the classroom, and students can see it, that that's the place where I'm going to go and work. So it's possible because you use immersive walkthrough for it. Immersive walkthrough can be created for plant, factories, sites, anything. Immersive tasks and activities can be carried out for an example, oil drilling process, which is there. I was told by some senior executives in Indian Oil. He suggested me that not everybody is allowed to go actually at that point to see how exactly the drilling takes place. Not everybody is allowed. But through virtual simulation, we can give exposure to everybody in our organization who we think is some way or other is going to interact on those aspects of work with their own team. There is a better understanding and better behavior expected out of the entire team, just because the boss also understands what exactly the pain points of the person is who is sitting remotely in a barren stretch somewhere doing a particular type of job. This is all easily visible and understandable. Like I keep repeating that we have a limited time, so I'll just confine to only one case study. This is one area where it is going to create a huge job opportunities for our current and the upcoming youth who want to grab opportunities in months and years to come. Because the social distancing or the COVID crisis has confined us to stay home and yet carry out our task and work. Internet of Things, where certain gadgets, or rather most of the gadgets in the house or at factory and offices, are going to be interconnected and get operated through technologies. How is somebody has to manage, somebody has to manage it, and that role so far no organization has identified or created. It is just being managed by somebody who existed in the particular job role and said, okay, since you are handling this, you can handle this as well. Like network admin guy is normally expected in organizations that, okay, any new technology piece comes, gets integrated, and let that guy also understand it. But that's not going to be. It is going to create, as we foresee and as I hear and as I refer some papers and documents, this is going to be one big area of job opportunities for all our passing graduates or passing 12th pass outs, or people who are wanting to get into the technology sphere. That is going to be automation technician's job. Why there is a need for automation technician? Low situational awareness results in slow response. Technicians have difficulty meeting aftermarket SLAs with geographically distributed customer base, which triggers costly penalties. Problem number 2 is that when production stops due to machine failure, on-site technicians need assistance immediately to resume production. However, the expert for this machine may be located in a different city, different state, or different country, depending on the type of equipment or the machinery people are using out there. How do we address them? It has taken days and weeks sometimes to address those issues. It kills the productivity of the organization. Thankfully, we do have technologies today that this all can be addressed. Using AR, VR, AI, you can manage all of this. Workers do not have, because even for the manufacturing operations, just a second. And so entire assembly line of entire manufacturing, the manufacturing process, it kind of gets affected due to certain supports are not reaching immediately. This can be addressed instantly or in a shortest possible time. This is possible thanks to the technology. To combat these challenges, we must have enhanced training skills of the our people. First, participants learn better when they can see themselves perform. VR allows learners to see themselves from a variety of angles as they move. When you use VR, actually you can see 360 degree. You can turn around anywhere in any direction, and you can get to see the same environment where you would be actually operating or carrying out that particular thing, which is where it gives a connect to the learner with the context or the topic, and there is a better experience derived out of those kind of sessions. Trainers and supervisors can invite learners to interact with their own behavior, learning from their mistakes in real time. Of course, like I said, it will sound repetitive. So companies can use, I have just covered that companies can use AR, VR for carrying out those kind of trainings. How immersive technologies are helping to become a better technician makes training visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Like I said, you learn by doing it. And as we all know that broadly, all learners have been categorized into 3 categories or the 3 parts. Like one is auditory learners, learn by hearing and reading, or kinesthetic visual learners learn by watching, observing the visuals, and the third one is kinesthetic, where you kind of try doing it and then you experience, and that's where you retain those knowledge and understanding about the particular thing. So it provides step-by-step visual and oral instructions in real time. It helps workers navigate the factory and warehouse more efficiently, identifies the proper tools and parts required for a task. Like I said, that if we want our student to kind of understand a particular product or the factory or the equipment or the mill or it takes hours if I do physically. The same VR experience can be completed in 10 to 12 or 14 minutes of time. It is so engrossing, so engaging. The best part of the VR experience is that it is distraction-free environment where only the learner interacts with the content and stays alone in the context in which he is learning things. Creative experience, industry experience, because we have worked in automotive, defense, education, manufacturing, oil and gas, power and utility, travel and tourism. Someone was mentioning just now that travel tourism industry is badly affected. Now, there are means and ways that we can organize a virtual tour of going to France or going to Taj Mahal, much without making an effort and traveling all the way. And one can get near real experience. I personally was very fascinated when I kind of took a tour of Taj Mahal using virtual tour, even though I had been 2 times before, but then it was awesome experience. So I'm sure people, those who have used VR, they understand the significance and the effect of learning. Power and utilities, like I said, that there are a lot of critical areas of operations. Currently, I'm working with one of the companies I can't really disclose, but where it is like a mill rejection system. There is a human worker actually at a point where he has a risk that when he touches the ash in certain hour, it might burn his hand, because there is no technology to suggest that, look, right now the temperature inside this ash is about 300 degrees Celsius, don't touch it. or 600 degrees Celsius, don't do it. Things like that. So those things can be taken care of with use of technologies, use of AR, VR, so to say. I'll just, I have another 2 slides and then I am done. So the role of government for implanting online AR, VR in skilling process. NSDC and SSC should identify a list of QPs, modules, not that every module has to undergo a transformation. The areas where we see necessarily that there has to be injection or sort of a kind of, infusion of AR, VR experience. So that can be added. Procure and provide these VR modules, because all the VR modules have to be procured by the government or through its agencies, and then it should get provided to all vocational training providers, all the skill training providers across the country, so that when we provide QPs, they are also provided with the content. So it's very easy for the training providers to carry out the training with the same degree of impact wherever students are using, because talents are there everywhere the same. It is just that we have to manage, we have to standardize our processes, and we have to carry our task forward. VR experience no doubt equips trainees with requisite skills, leaving chances of nil errors. I gave an example of commercial flying, that people have to undergo a number of VR experiences or the simulation experiences before actually flying the plane. How to integrate online AR, VR for impactful training during COVID times? It has posed a challenge to the people. VR could be experienced using gadgets and devices at the training place, but then now, thanks to WebXR technology, which is available, using WebGL platform, people are able to provide entire VR experience to the students across wherever in any training center. If there's a normal desktop like we are using or the laptop, people can get experience of AR, VR based content. With this, I will just try to finish another 2 minutes. And VATIF's home learning skill solution during COVID-19. This is something, it's a K-12 solution offered to the students who are confined to homes. It may not be relevant to this discussion, so I'm just skipping this slide. However, this is something just to mention that VATIF offers complete suite of AR, VR content for the K-12 students, where the teachers use it when the teacher-led classes happen through the Zoom or Google Hangout, and students are able to access content anytime during the day at their own convenience, provided they have access device with them. Thank you so much. Hello, Bharat.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for taking us through this, very illustrative talk on how to integrate AR, VR solutions into training and going forward with this whole thing. Of course, I have been getting alerts from the ASSOCHAM team saying that Mr. Mehta is taking a long time. I realize you have overstepped your time slot. However, I appreciate the kind of detail that you went into without getting boring, and it's really very illustrative what you shared with us as to the need for getting into AR, VR and how best to integrate it into existing government skill training. Thank you very much, Mr. Mehta. At the end of the session, you will be facing questions from the participants. We now move on to our second speaker for this morning, Mr. Neeraj Sinha. Welcome, Mr. Neeraj Sinha, to this webinar. He heads retail and consumer banking for SBM Bank India. He is going to talk to us about some innovative technology-based products for rural customers and how to make easy flow of funds for the skill sector in this context. I will briefly give you his background. As I said, he heads retail and consumer banking for SBM Bank India. His educational background is also very illustrious. He comes from the great Sri Ram College of Commerce and the Faculty of Management Studies, Delhi. And I'm very proud to introduce fellow Delhi University students over here. He's been at key positions in various commercial banking organizations, and he's a young, energetic professional who has a lot of innovative ideas. SBM Bank India is a new entrant into the private banking space in India and is trying to redefine traditional banking in the sense of not going the traditional branch expansion route and yet not limit their reach to rural India. And they plan to do this only by leveraging technology. So I would request Mr. Neeraj Sinha to kindly take us through this whole aspect of what SBM Bank is planning to do in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maya. Let me begin with a couple of thoughts. So first of all, I'm super glad to be part of the webinar. And like every participant in a webinar, let me start by asking, am I audible? Am I visible?
You're audible and
You are
visible.
audible.
Yeah.
I think that's the most used line in the times of COVID. It's not how are you, it's am I audible, am I visible? So couple of thoughts I wanted to start with. I'm super glad to be part of this ASSOCHAM association because I am from Ranchi. And before we started, I was checking with Bharat about where is the office and how far is it from my place. And my father was in government service, and now he, for a very long time, he ran his own small enterprise. So a lot of connection to a not non-so urban area, and a lot of connection to understanding the pain points people go through. So throughout in banking, and many of my colleagues will agree to it, that while we keep reading statistics about lack of employment opportunities in India, unemployment going high, any guy, whether in government service, private service, in self-employment, is always on the lookout for good people. So you understand that dichotomy at every point of time, even today in the times of COVID, personally and my organization is looking for good and quality people, while there's a whole host of people complaining that there's a lack of job opportunities. I think that's where an association like NSTC and what you are doing, Ms. Maya, comes in super handy. Because again, let me clarify, it's not that there's a lack of job opportunities, there's a lack of skilled professionals to do the jobs that we are looking at. Third thought I had is for a very long time, profit making was always separate from social enterprise. So people, corporates were looking at extreme high return on yield, and social enterprise was always left to the like of governments and some NGOs to take care of their job. What has COVID done for us? And I must be one of the very few people in the world who say I'm so glad that COVID happened. It is a status change for us. Without this kind of a shock in the industry and social life, none of us would have been receptive to any of the changes or ideas which will take us a little pain to achieve. What has COVID helped us do? And let's look at the positives, right? Because all around us, every newspaper, every magazine, every TV channel is only talking negative. Let's talk the positives of COVID. All of us have got to spend so much more time with our spouses, families, kids. I've spent more time with my wife than I did with her during my honeymoon. So first of all, it's a best opportunity for us to reorganize our social life, family life, work life. The entire work-life balance has been reset, and all of us have learned how to work from home. Now it is time for us to expand on the same theory. A lot of people from small cities, they are migrating, coming to larger centers, looking for a job opportunity. 10 of them staying in a 10 by 10 area, and hence prone to a lot of these unhygienic conditions, a lot of health related issues. Everybody, including me, would be happy to work out of my hometown. The reason I could not do it was two. One, lack of technology, where I could perform to the best of my ability sitting out of Ranchi instead of in Bombay. Second, there were never opportunities given to people if you are not in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, Calcutta. COVID has taught us that using technology, using broadband connectivity, people can work remotely. Now coming to the third point, which Mr. Ashok also put it very nicely in the PPT, that the expectation of a new enterprise is higher return on capital employed. For a new age bank like us, we got our licenses in the end of December. By the time we had people on was June 2019, so just about a year back. So for us, it was the best thing which could have happened, because for us, it has set our path right, that instead of going on a capital extensive model of opening 500, 1000, 2000 branches and 15,000, 20,000 ATMs, we have been necessitated due to COVID to learn how to use technology better. Banking as a service was essential, and people banks all the branches that we have. We have around 7 branches now. They have been functional. How could we do it? Bulk of the staff was sitting remotely using technology to do it. Now that brings me back to the point which I wanted. So long story, coming to the point which I wanted to, it's time for us now to use the learnings and what we have learned in the last 3 months in the field, which is, it is not necessary for people to be working in the office space that we define to be working. A guy with a laptop or a computer or a smartphone, which is secured, of course, wherever he's sitting becomes the office. And hence now we are looking at SBM Bank present at over 1 million touch points while physically present only in 7 to 10 locations. That's the objective that now we are going at. Now to do that, there are a couple of imperative items. First, of course, technology. But more importantly, skill development of the 1 million touch points I am looking at. These 1 million touch points traditionally have been a jeweler shop, have been a kirana store. So for them, the service requirement that a bank will have, and when I'm saying bank, let me include banking and other financial services. It could be insurance, it could be sale of mutual funds, it could be any of these services. Any PPT that we see from Bain and Company and from any McKinsey, BCG, everybody talks about the India which is in the villages. Everybody talks about the bottom of the pyramid, and that's why the FDI, FPI inflows are happening in India. To reach there, we don't need 1 million outlets. We need 1 million touch points. And to reach the 1 million touch points, it is very, very important that a skill development exercise is undertaken comprehensively. And this is the point I was trying to make, that a social development has to go hand in hand with enterprise building. No longer it is possible that somebody else is killing 1 million people and I'm looking at tapping and scrutinizing and approving a few of them. It is as much a job of the enterprise now to do skill development as it was traditionally the government. So hence the corporates need to come together with especially the banking services and the financial services have to come together with institutions and probably look at funding some of the technology initiatives using the CSR fund. Government has to come in much more holistically about simplifying certain regulations. On one hand, government is pushing all of us to spend 2% on CSR. Government has come out with an entire program of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, when you're talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, manufacturing is not the only sector. BFSI is an equally almost a good 25-30% of the economy. That has to go hand in hand, and to do that, if government is doing certain guarantees, government is doing a lot of financial enabling, up from the reduction in the SLR requirements, certain capital charge on the assets that we do. This has to be a asset that a corporate is spending in, that a bank is spending in, and holistically we should petition the Reserve Bank as well as the government that this is as much a asset quality, asset class as funding a loan against portfolio or loan against property. Because end of the day, the return on this is going to be exponential. A typical example can be that if people coming out of these institutes are much better trained, and he becomes a business correspondent for us, not only is he surviving for himself, because he's not only a self-employed guy, he's also looking at employing a few people with him and serving a community where banking had not reached even till date. If you go outside of 100 kilometers outside Bombay, if you go 20 kilometers outside Ranchi, there is no banking ability there. There is nothing called banking once we start moving out of cities. These are the solutions for these. The entire disbursement which the government is looking at doing under various programs can be automated. The entire small ticket lending, because once we have view on the data, it becomes an alternate source of credit behavior. And small ticket personal loans, very small tenor loans can be granted for the bridge financing of these individuals. So once we get the rails right, there is the entire train waiting to travel the journey. And to get the rails right, the building blocks are skill development. So summarizing 3 pitches: 1, skill development need not be focused only on certain manufacturing sectors. The scope has to be expanded. A lot of non-manual skills, non-hand-based skills, which is a lot of understanding the customer behavior. Whatever training we as bankers get, a subset of that can be imparted here. Second, industry has to come together with government to do this, because it is no longer a fashionable or CSR activity. It is a requirement for the industry to generate higher ROCE. And most importantly, thirdly, due to this COVID, this entire PPT which I could have made is now very easily understandable to everyone, because all of us are living it. All of us are together here from different parts, understanding how technology works, how AR VR works. So this is no better time to do a step change than today. That's all I had to say. Thank you, Ms. Maya. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Neeraj. That was so well put, and the greatest point I think Mr. Neeraj Sinha has made for this morning is the buy-in of industry, which is required for effective skill development. For true skill development to happen, industry will have to buy in. It will stop having to be just the government's obligation to skill people. It will stop having to be some CSR funded activity which is done by some foundation which has just been formed to, I'm sorry to use this kind of language, but which has been found to accommodate the wives of directors. I'm very sorry to use this statement, but we know that this is very close to the truth. I think the time has come, and very well put, that the pandemic has forced us to look at things which we chose to ignore all this while. So the marriage of industry with social impact activities, and marriage of return on capital employed with a social impact, which has to happen only with active role played by industry. I think that was very well brought out by Mr. Neeraj Sinha. Thank you so very much. And there will be questions for you at the end of the session. Thank you very much, Mr. Neeraj. We now move on to the next speaker for this morning, who is Dr. Sumit Suseelan. He is the chairman of the International Institute of Aviation Private Limited. He's sitting in an unenviable position actually today. I think aviation sector is one of the worst hit by the pandemic, and which has to therefore quickly think on its feet as to how it's going to turn around, and how it's going to, I don't even have a suggestion off the cuff to make to him as to how they can do business differently, because there is only one way of transporting people, and there is only one way of flying aircraft, and there is only one way of making all that work. And it's a nightmare to think what an airline industry is today facing, be it lease rentals on their aircraft, be it fuel prices, be it manpower. They are facing so many crises on so many fronts. He's absolutely in an unenviable position. But out of that should come, it's only when you're pushed to the corner that you really think of something very innovative and something which is really a game changer, which is what we expect from him today, as to how technology related issues for skilling in this sector going forward, given all his challenges, how are they going to pan out for him in the coming months, shall I say, in the coming years, because it's going to be a few years before the aviation sector is able to get on its feet again. To briefly introduce him, he is an aviation expert. He has more than 15 years of experience in aviation, And while his educational background is really in psychology, and he's an MBA with HR specialization, so we expect today from him an illustrative talk on how going forward aviation industry is going to use technology and reskilling, upskilling, new skilling for their sector's requirements in the future. Over to you, Dr. Suseelan.
Thank you, Maya ma'am, for such a lovely introduction. I'm really great to be in the meeting with SHM today. Okay, yeah, you have rightly said that we are badly hit. The industry, our aviation industry, tourism industry are really badly hit. If I'll give the current numbers, like till the first week of June, number of scheduled flights have decreased to 65%, and in comparison with the last year 2019, and Italy is worstly impacted, and they have 98% flight cancelled compared to the last year. And overall, the Europe is 88% market is down in aviation industry. So we are really badly hit because of the COVID situation. And in India, the first airline company which got collapsed on the first week of April was the first low-cost carrier of India, Air Deccan. It got collapsed and they had declared bankrupt and they had closed down their operations, which they were operating in Gujarat under the Prime Minister's scheme of Udan, Udega Desh Ka Aam Nagarik, where they were giving subsidies on the flight tickets. The flight tickets were so cheap, the passengers were availing the flight between Ahmedabad to Surat for 1,500 rupees. And really, that was a very bad situation that they had collapsed and they had shut down their entire operation. So currently, because I will say that Ashok sir was telling about the virtual reality which is upcoming. But if we are gonna introduce the virtual reality in tourism sector, it's been killing the industry completely. Because if a person will not visit any particular site, definitely the shopkeeper, the airline industry, the hotel industry, everything will collapse. So somewhere the aviation industry supports a lot of other industry also, because if we have aviation, we have tourism sectors booming up, we have hospitality sector coming up, we have travel sectors coming up. So aviation is interconnected. Even if you see, like if I'll give an example, the development of a city comes from aviation, because if you have a small place which are upcoming to the airport, the entire the area's price go high. So I had heard, like in the Noida, when the airport proposal came up, the entire rates gone high of the properties. The people who were having a plots over there, they started selling the properties for 5-star hotels. So whenever the airports comes up, the entire industry, the entire area get developed. So aviation plays a major role in India, and it contributes to 0.5% of GDP also. Around 35,000 crores turnover we do yearly, with around 3 million people working in this industry. And future job we have, like currently we have around 130 airports in India and expected to have around 430 airports in next 3 years. Right now we are the 9th largest aviation market in the world, and we are expected to be world's #1 by next 2 to 3 years. If the situation, if we recover from this situation and we comes up, we have a huge potential in aviation industry. Recently we have came up with the sector skill council for aerospace and aviation industry. So right now we are facing a little issue with the sector skill council, that we have sector skill council in aerospace department, but industry doesn't recognize it, because even like airline industry doesn't know that there are something called sector skill council in aerospace department also. So it's like a government initiative have to be taken, that we have to collaborate with each other, so that we can, the training partner, the training centers can train the manpower, and the same manpower can be utilized by the industry. So that will be the best way to provide the employers to the industry. Currently in aviation industry, most of the time the airlines recruit only experienced people. The pressure doesn't have much value in the industry, because aviation industry don't want to take risk. A small mistake can lead to disaster in aviation industry. So for the same thing, because of the security reason, even the trainees can't enter any airports for on-job trainings, which is a hurdles which we are facing right now, being the partner for the aerospace department. If it can be solved by the collaboration of airline industry or airline companies and government body, so the training partner will get access to the airports. Once the students or the trainees will get trained under any airline as an on-job training, so this problem can be resolved and these students can be treated as experienced candidates and they can get employment in aviation industry. as Ashok sir said that new way of trainings like virtual reality. Even in aviation, we were planning for a virtual reality training. We had planned to launch this thing by 2021, but because of this COVID situation, we had preponed the entire plan. And this year itself, we had launched a virtual reality training where a person don't have to visit anywhere. They don't have to go to airport or they don't have to visit the aircraft for taking a practical training of aviation. So with the help of the virtual reality training, a person can wear this virtual reality equipment and can take an experience of the scenario. Suppose on board firefighting, if a person have to give a first aid or they have to search a bomb on board. So everything can be possible by these softwares. So now this virtual reality, definitely in India, we don't have this technology yet. We had imported this technology from Italy. Although before Italy is definitely costing very high rate because in India because it's coming in euro. We have to pay in euro. So every equipment we have to pay around 2.5 lakh rupees for per training, which is very expensive part. If a sector skill council can allow a subsidy or a banking sector can support us to get this equipment by any type of loan, definitely it will be good that more training partners will come ahead and will take this type of technology to train students. And if even government can allow and they can give up an affiliation to use this type of equipment and can certify the candidates, these trainees can be asset for the industry. Even currently we have some of the affiliation body who gives this type of affiliation to us. Mostly the affiliation uh, with the 50,000 to 80,000 rupees salary, and small town people get trapped in this type of in news, and they end up in paying some type of bribe to get a job, and finally they don't get anything. So I think if the industry will take up an initiative to give a recognition to any institutes who are are in criteria to give training for aviation industry, so I think this will be beneficial for the citizen of the country also, and people will not get into the scam because a couple of years back some of the tribal people from villages they got trapped in these type of things and they had taken overseas for jobs and they were not aware about like this can be happened through this type of ads. So it's better like if we can give a awareness for aviation industry like industry and what is the effects. So that will I will not take much time because I know because it's only question and answer rounds are left. So I will give the time to other panelists so that they can also talk.
Thank you, Dr. Susilan, and thank you for making a very important point on, of very valid accreditation being for the process of accreditation to become more realistic and more innovative, more scientific, and therefore more dependable, which would go a long way in training the youth in remote parts of India for the aviation sector skills. We now come to the last speaker of this morning, that is Mr. Sujay Gopal Rao. He is Chief Manager of the Indian Overseas Bank in Mumbai. And I'm extremely happy to have him with us this morning because well, we've all been talking the whole morning on our wish list as to how this whole issue of skills has to be handled going forward, etc., etc. Here is the man who is actually a person who has done a lot of lending to this sector, and he's done lending to training service providers who work purely on government funded projects, who don't have the traditional comfort of a factory building, of stocks, of materials lying, of clients, of payments coming through. The only thing such training providers are ever able to offer banks are cash flows stemming from government contracts, cash flows stemming from long-term government contracts, which basically say if you train people, we will pay you. Based on that, a nationalized bank, a very traditional nationalized bank, embodied in Mr. Sujay Gopal Rao, actually took this risk to lend to such training service providers. And in the process of this credit evaluation, I have personal knowledge of the kind of in-depth study Mr. Rao did of this entire sector, including interaction with state government officials, NSDC, sector skills councils, understanding the various parts and various moving parts to this whole of skilling in India. So we would like to hear from Mr. Rao this morning as to going forward, given the fact that all training centers of all vocational training providers is currently shut. This year, financial year 2021 has seen the first quarter go by with nil receipts. In all likelihood, the second quarter is also going to go by with nil receipts. So how does he expect, or what is the kind of comfort that the banks would look at in government contracts going forward, which would give them the reassurance that the lending that they have done is sound, the money that they have lent is going to come back to them, and it's going to come back in its entirety. It may take a bit of time, but it's going to happen, and that there is no case for them to feel nervous about this lending. And also, what is the kind of relook that the bank is willing to look at given this unprecedented situation? So over to you, Mr. Rao.
Thank you, madam. Good afternoon to everybody. I am Sujay Gopal Rao, Chief Manager from Indian Overseas Bank, New Marine Lines Branch, Mumbai. Getting back to Mr. Sinha's question, am I visible, audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. All right. July 19th, 1969. That was the date of nationalization of banks. When banks got nationalized, at that time, banking was still fine, but the country was, picking up. It was still messy. The idea of the nationalization is to ensure that banking reaches the common man. Since then, change has been a constant factor since then. Banks changed, the way of technology has changed. Like Mr. Mehta pointed out, technology has come so much that banks are quite aware of this. But banks are still in their infancy in adopting those technologies. Then the government policies changed, the PMRY came up, and then the Rozgar Yojanas, the Shahri Rozgar, rural, everything came up. Now we are right now in the fact that we are also funding the organizations which impart skill development. Basically, there are only two sectors, either the government sectors or the non-government sectors. Most of the non-government sectors, they believe funding comes only from CSR activity. They do not approach banks. Most of the bankers are also not aware that lending to the NGO sector is possible. That's the reality, right? So what we have to do is, first we have to train the bankers, saying that yes, lending can be done to any kind of sector. There are existing rules within the framework provided by Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India. Yes, lending can be done. Now, how to do this lending? First of all, we must understand whatever is the project involved in this. First, we have to meet the government officials directly. The government has to give a seal of approval for every project. Second, the assessment should change slightly. I mean, you cannot have a kind of assessment which is used for industry or for trade or like corporate lending, which Mr. Sinha and Mr. Sumit also pointed out. You cannot have that kind of lending for an NGO sector. It has to be project-based. Let us say, for example, a training is a project for 5 years or 6 years. The lending should be there for 5 years or 6 years. We should not go into every year reviewing. We should not go into saying, all right, fine, what is your sales for this year? What is your cash flow for this year? No, it doesn't. It should not work that way. Unfortunately, that's how it works as of now. As far as the borrowers are concerned, the government has come up with so many kinds of lending. For example, you have a Mudra lending. I am only talking about the lowest segment of lending, that individual lenders, right? Do we have a requirement which says, yes, you get me a certificate from a skill development organization, then I will give you the loan? No, we do not have such certificates. So we need such certificates. What happens? the skill development sector will progress automatically, right? Sometime back, there was a need that, all right, when you're giving a PMRY loan, you have to get a certificate from a block development officer. Now that is just a certificate. We know how it works. I'm sorry to say that, but we know how it works, right? But in this case, the government is funding the skill development sector. So it becomes mandatory, rather it should become mandatory, that any mudra loan, any small activity, yes, somebody says I'm going to make juice, all right, fine. Where is your certificate? You go and get your certificate, get your training done, right? Through a registered skill development sector, which should be compulsory. That is my opinion, first. Secondly, the RBI, the government, they have got norms for every sector. Including skill development sector, it is there, but specifically for a skill improvement of a skill development sector, it doesn't exist. We should bring out. I appeal to the government through this medium that the government should come out with some sort of different module. That is, for example, in a particular case, let us say the funding from a government comes a bit late, 3 months late. All right, NPA finished. We should not do that. This is what I'm coming to. It should be project based, right? There's a project for 4 years. You wait. Let the bank wait for 4 years. The norms can be slightly changed, or I would say amended, to bring this. And it is possible. It has been done in other countries also. I was in Hong Kong for about 4 years. There, for all government-based projects, everything goes through the government. Your lending goes through the government. Your certificate, your training, everything goes through the government. Banks cannot do anything. Even 1 day late, the government, takes care of the borrower, and they decide whether it's got to be an NPA or not. Here, it's not like that. We piggyback on certain rules which are internationally followed. It is good, but for this particular sector, lending to the skill development sector, there should be slightly different norms. I would say a little bit of convenience and little bit of lenience must be there. This is my take on this. I don't have much to say. Anything else you are willing to shoot questions? I'm willing to share. Thank you.
So that is typical Mr. Sujay Gopal Rao to make a very valid and valuable point in very few minutes. This boost that he has suggested for skill development, that anyone who goes in for a small micro lending to the bank at the bottom of the pyramid, if even the current part of the stimulus package that the government has announced for street vendors, that they are going to give them some 10,000 rupees or something, which is a very small sum of money. But at that level, if the government would insist that you have to have some kind of recognition of your skill, you may not have a college degree, you may not have a diploma from a technical institute, but you must have either an ITI certificate or some vocational training provider recognized by Government of India, recognized by NSDC, must certify that you have the required skill to set up a juice stall. It cannot. This will improve the quality of lending. This will improve the quality of assets that are created through this large amount of taxpayer money which is spent on all this. That was a very valid point, and I'm very glad you made that, Mr. Rao. Bharat, would you want to throw it open now for questions? Bharat?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so do you want to throw it open for questions? How do you want to do this?
Ma'am, we have very generic questions which are coming up. So,
okay. So do you want to get them addressed, or how do you want to carry forward, or do we want to go in for a summing up?
So, ma'am, we have one question which is coming, like, what is AR and VR? So, this is a very generic question. So, AR and VR is like, Mr. Mehta, if you want to highlight this thing, that what exactly, someone has asked that what is AR and VR?
Yeah, thank you. So when we talk about AR, VR, the technology per se is nothing new. It is just about, that when we want to recreate some scenario, let's say we read in the history that Qutub Minar was built by so and so, and we have to go to take a tour of Qutub Minar. There are some stories you are not allowed to go beyond because they say that there is a threat to life or whatever reason, the ASI is not allowing you. Now you can recreate those scenes in the form of visuals, and one can take an experience because one can go around and then walk through with the help of a joystick or some controller, and all you need to do is that you need to have a computer or a screen, some application created around it, and one can get that experience. When we talk about VR, it requires a device to wear, and then you get teleported into that world. For an example, if I'm talking about photosynthesis, and if I am there to learn about photosynthesis, the moment I wear the device, actually I land into a garden, and I can see the sunlight coming in. I become part of the spectator right inside the tree. I can go inside the bark, inside the leaf, and see how exactly the light is coming, and it is getting an influence on various other components. The chlorophyll is formed, and the feeding happens. So anything which is our knowledge or our imagination can be given in the form of a shape and in the form of a visuals. So that is what you create using technology. AR VR technology helps you to create these scenarios, create these kind of so-called in a normal language I can say sort of a video, though it is not a video because video is something you see from a distance. So the difference between a normal video and AR VR is that in AR VR you don't see from a distance, you become part of that scenario. A video you see from a distance, which is coming in the form of 2D. Here you become part of the 3D scenario itself. So learning becomes much more experiential. Of course, the pedagogy is designed that way that one has one would be given the whole journey of learning certain things, and it happens. So maybe the concerned person can write a mail, and I can share more details. I can share some links. One can go to the site of www.veative.com, and you get to understand the whole AR VR world, because there is a lot of, in fact, during COVID time, we have also given free access to students of class 1 to 12th to study their content, study their topics, which is part of their curriculum, and it is available for free. One can access it.
That's great, sir. So we have one question from like George, and what he's talking is like, how can we take a franchisee or become a local skill development partner of a national skill development partner? So, ma'am,
Yes, maybe this may not be the platform to discuss. In general, I can answer that we appoint, yes, we appoint our partners in different cities in the country. Veative currently has presence in 25 countries, and we are Unity, which happens to be the platform owner of the entire VR that we create. Like we have Intel and we have AMD. Likewise, we have Unity, and there are some other platform owners like Unreal and others. Unity holds more than 80% of the market share currently in the world. And we are Unity's partner to set up the first center of excellence in India way back in 2016. We are appointing our partners across the country in order to augment the AR VR side of learning experience for students, and we are therefore associating ourselves or offering all our support to training centers, academies, and even people who want to reach out with this solution to schools. Investment for AR VR would range for a school in the range of 7 lakh to 15 lakh rupees, and for training academies it would be much more because you need to set up a center of excellence.
Ma'am, there is one question for you, ma'am, like how to make skills and labor market intelligence policy relevant. Like since the labor, migrant labor is coming and there is lots of challenge which industry is facing these days. How to skill them, or if we can deploy, what is the way forward for that? That is the question, ma'am. Ma'am, your voice is you're not audible, ma'am. You're not audible, ma'am.
Hello, Bharat.
Yes.
Bharat, can you
Audible,
hear me?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear the question properly, Bharat.
Ma'am, the question is regarding the labor migration which is happening these days, and how we can skill those, or how we can take it forward so that it can be consumed, because lots of labor migration has taken place and they have gone their respective native place. So how we can skill them to what should be the way forward?
Okay, so now there can be two levels of answering this question. One is a theoretical answer, which is a drawing board answer, which is that we will skill them in local skills, we will integrate them with Atmanirbhar Bharat, and we will make them relevantly skilled for local industry and get them job opportunities there. The other is the real answer. The real answer is that market forces will take over. As you know, already there is a reverse migration happening. Already people have started moving back from these labor surplus poor states of the country. People have started coming back to the urban conglomerates where they had their jobs. And as we read in the newspapers, all these trains coming back from UP and Bihar are coming back full. And you can take it that once they come back to their old jobs, there's going to be again market forces will take over, and there will possibly be much more exploitation now than there was, because industry is going to be facing a recession in demand, so they may not be able to employ all of them back, although lifting of lockdowns may permit them to start their factories. They may not be able to employ all of them. They may ask to revise their wages, downward revision of wages, because their markets are going to be down, their demands are going to be down. So the reality is extremely grim for those who are returning back to the urban conglomerates. They are going to be squeezed on the wage front. They are going to be squeezed on their living conditions front, because industry is not going to be able to afford paying the earlier wages, employing the same number of people. They have to observe norms of social distancing. They have to incur higher costs for sanitization, for testing of their labor, etc., etc. So actually, they're going to face a much worse situation when they come back. But the few that do stay back home, the answer if the government is willing to look at it like this. You see, the places they have gone back to have hardly enough industry to support them. So what we will have to do is look at training, take up a point like Mr. Neeraj Sinha suggested. The training will have to now be done in order to empower these guys to become self-employed people in rural India. They will have to be trained in new skills. They cannot be construction sector workers and working in small shops and working in small restaurants in urban India and somehow eking out a living. They will have to be skilled differently, in order that they maybe even being remote, maybe with virtual reality stepping in, rather connectivity issues stepping in, maybe they're able to render services even while they continue to stay at home in rural India. They're able to render services for certain sectors in urban India. That's one kind of training that will have to be done. The other kind of training will be where they become self-employed for maybe the BFSI, maybe for other sectors for selling. Those opportunities will pan out. So the new kind of skilling that will have to be done is to make the emphasis move towards self-employment rather than wage employment. That is the way that skilling would move for those who have moved back home.
Bharat, if I may add, I would like to add a point here to what Ms. Maya has said. Is you see the beauty of it. Government has been pushing banks to do mudra loans to create self-employment opportunities. Right, exactly what Mr. Sujay was saying. If adding on to what Ms. Maya is saying, if we are looking collectively to add self-employment opportunities even in rural pockets and expand the nature of services for self-employment that they can do, that's probably ultimately forces of competition, industry, and profit making will ensure it will happen. We have seen it earlier happening in telecom. Look at the way telecom proliferated. Even the smallest shops, they are selling those airtimes. Ultimately, it has to happen. What we can do to accelerate is use the government policies effectively, like the mudra loans for these, and to give mudra loans to make it much more qualitative. Use skill development certificates, use reskilling certificates required, and run a program on those to effectively use these funds. Otherwise, typically, a short stint of time I've spent in a credit bureau in India, one of the largest credit bureaus in India. And when I used to meet any credit head across largest banks, mudra loan was in their mind a write-off. So, and it's a substantial amount. So the best way to make money out of mudra loan, make it credit worthy, is add skill development as a necessary condition. Over to you, Bharat.
Ma'am, we have one more question, which is like, as there one more question, like, as the skill center are closed, is there any package for those centers to support them?
Oh, I wish they were. We don't have any such packages. We are facing a very terrible situation. I don't want to say too much. My banker is present in this in this session, but we are facing a situation where we are sitting on nil revenues for quarter 1, possibly nil revenues for quarter 2, and we have these gentle mandates coming across as to how we shouldn't lay off people, how we shouldn't cut salaries. I mean, I'm not going to be borrowing from the bank and paying interest just to pay salaries to guys who are sitting at home. No commercial organization can run like that. So there is no package. I wish whoever has asked this question is privy to some package that is coming out from somewhere. There is no package, except that, of course, banks have been, I mean, as part of the larger stimulus package, banks have extended moratorium. They are extending extra credit also to us. That, of course, is there. But from the government, as a skill development provider, I'm not getting any package for this.
One more question.
With the same thing,
Yes, please.
yeah, I would like to talk the same thing from Mr. Neeraj, as he's coming from the private banking sector. As for the government side, from government banks, we get skill loans for the candidate who are looking for, pursuing course or any sector skill courses. But are any private banks offering this type of skill loans under the subsidy scheme? Mr. Neeraj.
So for the banking sector, and from a policy point of view, there is no difference between the way government treats a private bank or a public sector unit. The only difference is government is a majority shareholder in certain banks. So all these loan schemes, be it mudra or the street vendor loan that government is asking, are available to be used by any of the private sector banks as well. Now the question happens is, for a private sector bank, and very pertinent that you asked, there's a substantial percentage of your loan book, whether you're a private sector or a foreign bank or a public sector bank, that has to be for priority sector lending. We call it PSL. Now the difference is, for a PSU, because the number of branches they have, and let me say it, for the better quality of branch managers they have, who have done various rounds across different functions, they are able to generate granular 10,000, 15,000 rupees PSL loans. For larger banks, foreign owned banks, for private banks, probably the easier way out comes into buying PSL certificates that you can buy, or you can buy an asset, or you can buy NABARD bonds. That's what they choose to do. So what you're suggesting is a very hard job, which largely PSU banks in India have chosen to do. The easier job is to buy a PSL certificate. that most of the private banks do. But to your question, is it available to be done by private sector banks? Of course it is. And I would request Mr. Sujay also to add if I have said something incorrect.
No, you're absolutely perfect.
You
Thank
see,
you.
the beauty is earlier a private PSU banker today also, and let me say it very openly, that the quality of skill set he generates is far richer because he's definitely asked to serve in rural areas, then urban areas. He has been rotated across different functions within the bank, from credit to sales to self origination and collections. Now, what happened is when we adopted the mushrooming of banks happened, we adopted some of the foreign bank practices. There were separate people. So a collections guy rose from being an assistant manager to senior VP in collections. So probably the well-rounding didn't happen. And the easier way out always was to buy the PSL certificates or buy a NABARD bond.
So that's the issue right now with the
That's such
industry.
that's a point made very well. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the Ministry of Skill Development and this NSDCA had given uniform fee structure for most of all the industry. Like it can be from the agriculture, it can be from aviation or tourism. We are getting like here and there, we are getting the same per hour costing for the training side, which is not enough for if you compare with aviation industry. Our fee structures are way too high compared to our normal customer service training. If I have to train a pilot under this training, so normally we charge 40 lakh rupees for a pilot training, whereas a government will provide me around 50,000 rupees maximum, you know. So definitely students who have a dream to become something in a career, if they are asking for some support from the government, so I think there should be some provision from the government side also for these type of job roles.
So
Mr.
technically,
Sumit,
so far I think,
if I may add here, Mr. Sumit, you are looking only at pilot
Yeah.
jobs. I'm looking at air hostess jobs. I'm looking at air host jobs. I'm looking at the
technicians.
cleaner jobs. I'm looking at the the ground level jobs which require skills, and
Yes.
that can be handled by the skill development center. That is my view.
That's what we are doing right now. But still, the costing which we are getting, like from the sector skill concept is not enough to train quality candidates. But right now, under the aerospace department, we are taking care of customer service, we are taking care of security and aerospace trainings. But this for the time that they are providing, the remuneration which they are providing is not enough to give a quality training from the institute side. So we have to
So,
charge them,
Dr.
but yeah.
Dr. Susilan, that point applies almost to all industries. The kind of money that the government provides may not seem sufficient for giving training to very high-end skills which get you very high wages. However, to be fair to the government, you see, when you're using taxpayer money for something, you have to aim at larger public good. You cannot cater for a small niche level application of funds. Your funds have to be applied in such a way, taxpayer funds have to be applied in such a way that there is larger good and therefore larger numbers. Yeah, Neeraj, please go ahead.
Yeah, so that brings me back to my pitch, right? That it cannot be the government funding most of these. If as a sector we believe that end of the day, one key metric any HR department in any of the institutes has, any of the organizations has, is cost of sourcing, is the cost of onboarding a resource. It's a very given thing that you have to pay an employment search agency money to get you a candidate. So let me again say that finding a good candidate is a HR's job's constant endeavor. Now, if part of it can be used, if it is proven as a metric that a person coming from the skill development institutes is far better, stays longer, performs better, why would you not as an industry want to pay the cost of sourcing here? That can get complemented to what government is providing and hence start becoming a substantial sum. And that will apply even to pilots in some form or shape. Because, I'm very less literate on the aviation sector, apart from, yeah, of course,
So
having the luxury of
if I
flight.
tell you about the pilot job, it's not only the airline pilot side we are saying. Right now, we are targeting for drone pilots which we already had got the license. So nowadays you will see most of, like, by the end of this year, you can see deliveries happening through this drone system. For that also we need pilot. We already got initial license for 6 companies in India. So you can see Amazon and Dunzo and all delivering the goods by the mode of this. Delivery boys will start losing jobs. So this is the time that we have to upskill them, and we have to give them some subsidies that they can go for pilot trainings for drones at least.
I think the one very important point which has emerged with this whole discussion is the need for industry to buy into this whole thing and come together with training service providers and not depend on government for every kind of funding. I think that was a very valuable suggestion that Neeraj made for shall I say higher end jobs, and a very valuable suggestion that came from Sujay was on this bottom of the pyramid lending, how that can be combined with skilling for that sector. So Bharat?
Since now giving in time in consideration, we have the plan program has reached. Every good thing has to come to an end. So now we have one. So ma'am, before closing the program, what I'll be requesting a brief concluding remarks from you and a vote of thanks, ma'am.
Right. So that was a quick 2 hour. 2 hours flew by, and it was, I think, this morning we've managed to get together on this webinar thanks to ASSOCHAM's efforts. People who have brought to the table different and critical aspects of skilling in the country and the way forward. The obvious solution to post-pandemic was introduction of technologies into training, which was illustrated very well by Mr. Ashok Mehta. What are the technological tools available and how best to integrate them in training modules going forward for various sectors. We then had Neeraj Sinha come in with some very valuable suggestions. One was the kind of skilling that could be done for the BFSI going forward, and a very valuable suggestion being the marriage of industry with a social impact sector like skilling. How industry will have to buy in, how industry will have to have skin in the game, and also why should industry not have skin in the game if they're really getting what are called good quality people. If good quality people can be produced by training service providers, industry would be more than happy to buy into this whole story, was the moot point that Neeraj brought to this table. Dr. Susilan helped us very well in bringing in the unique position of the aviation sector vis-a-vis training skills. And as Sujay complimented him, there are many skills which are lower end skills even in the aviation sector, which could very well be addressed through Sector 6 skill councils and vocational training providers who are empaneled with Sector Skills Councils as well as the NSDC. Sujay Rao brought in valuable inputs from public sector lending point of view, and in that a very valuable suggestion which came out was making skilling or making recognized skilling a prerequisite for bottom of the pyramid lending like Mudra lending. So I'm grateful to all of you to have spent your valuable time with us this morning in discussing and addressing these important issues. I think what emerges therefore, Bharat, for you to incorporate in your paper, which will finally be submitted to various government agencies as well as other stakeholders in this picture, is A, the need to look at newer skills going forward and not stick to the traditional skills that Sector Skills Councils have been doing so far. B, looking at newer industry and newer sectors which are likely to emerge, newer business opportunities which are likely to emerge, and remodel skilling to fit the needs of this emerging industry opportunities in the country as well as globally. C, the need to get industry to buy in and contribute into producing good quality trained personnel who are appropriately skilled for the necessary jobs that industry wants. 4 would be making it mandatory to have some kind of a certification from skilling councils or from training service providers for all kinds of bottom of the pyramid lending by government banks as well as private banks. And lastly would be the point that government would have to seriously relook at all their flagship programs under the skill development ministry, which is the PMKVY, the DDU GKY, mega skill centers. They will have to seriously relook at terms of payment to include provisions for technology enabled solutions, for imparting training, for compensating training providers for the extra costs that they would have to incur as we go forward, when we will have to maintain norms of social distancing, we'll have to maintain norms for sanitization, etc. So we would be requesting the government to kindly relook at the provisioning for money for these skills, for this kind of training. Is there anything any of the speakers feel I have left out or omitted? Would any of you like to suggest something that should be included? Or are we okay with it? Yeah? Okay.
Fine.
So with that, we come to an end to this morning session. And once again, I thank all of you for having spared your valuable time, for being with us, for giving it the kind of seriousness that we looked forward to. And we hope to be interacting more in the future. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Bharat.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Right.